If you're an Edexcel A-Level Business student looking for a video to revise all of Theme 4.2 Global Markets and Business Expansion, well, this video is for you. Because we're going to cover everything that you need to know for your exams, including the different conditions that prompt trade. We'll also take a look at assessment of countries for either being a market or a production location. We'll look at all the different reasons as well for global mergers and joint ventures. And then we'll finally finish the session up looking at global competitiveness. Let's get into it. The first topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the conditions that prompt trade. Essentially, it's the reasons why a business is involved with their global activities. First of all, we have our push factors, and these are more negative reasons why a business would act globally. Essentially, they are being pushed out of their original market. So the domestic market that they are currently in, they are being pushed out of and having to be forced to look into new international ones. Now, this could be through a different number of reasons. First of all, we've got market saturation. And this is when a market becomes fully supplied with a product or service, leaving little room for further business growth. Which basically means that most of the potential customers in that market already own the product or have access to the service, making it very difficult for existing businesses to increase their sales without really expanding into new markets. So market saturation will limit the potential business growth that they have in their original domestic market, prompting them to expand into new international ones. Or it could be the fact that the market is extremely competitive. Looking at Porter's 5 forces, we look at the intensity of competitive rivalry. Now remember, what Porter argued, the stronger the one of the forces are, the lower the profitability would be in that industry or market. So if in our original domestic market it was extremely competitive, businesses were competing on low prices, there was a price war in the market, or they're heavily investing into research and development and differentiation, well, this may push us out of our original domestic market and have to look to international ones. The other factors that we have is also our pull factors. Now, this is more positive reasons. A pull factor is what's pulling a business to that market. It's more of those attractive reasons that draw companies into their international market. Now, this could be several different factors. First of all, it could provide them with more overall growth opportunities. And we know as the businesses expand, their level of output increases, reducing their unit cost because of economies of scale. And as we know with economies of scale, the lower unit cost gives us a benefit in one or two different ways. Either we can be more competitive, offering lower prices, or we can just have healthier profit margins. So if our profitability increases, well, of course, if we make more profit with a higher profit margin, that would typically lead to good financial performance. And another reason why that business might be pulled into those international markets, because it helps that business spread their risk across different markets or countries. Because let's say, for example, within the UK, we go into an economic recession. Level of consumer spending goes down. There's not a lot of business growth activities or opportunities for us. Now, if I was only operating in the UK, that's going to massively impact my business. But if I am operating in those different markets and countries, well, that's not going to impact me as much because I've got different income streams. So it reduces the dependency on a single market, once again, minimizing the impacts of risks such as economic downturns. Another one of our conditions that will also prompt trade is this concept called offshoring. Now, offshoring is when a business relocates its operations, whether it's production, logistics, whatever it might be, to another country. So for example, our headquarters could be in Ireland, but we can move our production facilities into a country such as China. But it is important to note that it's still under my business's control. There is a concept called outsourcing, and students typically get these two mixed up. Now, as we said, all offshoring is that we're taking part of our business's operations and moving it to a different country. Now, offshoring, the reason why we do this is because typically in these foreign countries, potentially in one of the emerging economies, we may find that we actually have lower costs, such as lower labour costs, because the minimum wages in those foreign markets might be a lot less than the ones in my current market. And as well, we may be accessing more specialised workforces, because as we said earlier on in Theme 4 about the connection between specialisation and a competitive advantage. So there's certain countries across the world that will focus on specialisation. However, the issue is, if one of the only reasons I'm moving part of my operations overseas because I'm trying to take advantage and exploit the worker situation, because the minimum wage in my country could be £12 an hour, but in that developing country it could only be 50 pence an hour, that can be seen as an unethical thing for me to do. And as well, we may find issues with the cultural barriers, because if I'm moving my production or whatever part of operations overseas, then we may see a reduction in efficiency due to those language barriers. And as I said, we've also got this concept called outsourcing. Now, students typically get offshoring and outsourcing mixed up. So first of all, let's define what we mean by outsourcing. Outsourcing is when a business uses an external company to perform specific operations or tasks instead of doing them internally. So we may potentially outsource part of our manufacturing, accounting, advertising, and so on. Now, when we look at this outsourcing company, they can be even within our country or overseas. Now, it doesn't matter if we outsource overseas or outsource within the UK, it is still called outsourcing. Now, one of the reasons why we would look at outsourcing is because that external company that we're handing part of our operations potentially over to may be better at doing the thing than us. So what we find is that quality may begin to increase. And rather than us just setting up everything ourselves, which would cost a lot of money over the short term, outsourcing can actually be more cost effective in the short term. Keep that in mind, because that's where I think the evaluation could come into it. But of course, when we talk about the quality, it just depends on who you are outsourcing it to. Because the big problem is that we are losing control. We are taking an external company to handle part of our operations. So we need to make sure that we have strong communication with them. And actually, over the long term, it could be more expensive. Because yes, I don't have to invest those upfront costs to get into it, but the fee that I'm paying them over a longer period of time could end up being a lot higher than what those original investments may be. And the final condition that prompts trade is around the extending of the product life cycle. Now, when we look at the product life cycle, this is a topic that we learned back in Theme 1. And what you'll find is, for a lot of the Theme 4 topics, it's just the Theme 1, 2, 3 stuff applied to a global basis. Now, of course, entering into these global markets can extend our product life cycle because we have more sales. We're entering in new markets where customers haven't seen our product before. It's looking at a market development strategy from Ansoff's matrix. Now, yes, with the product itself, you may need to adapt it to meet those cultural needs of those local consumers. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the assessment of a country as a market. Now, of course, a business can expand into many different markets across the world, but they would want to be conducting these different assessments to see which one is the most attractive. Now, there are several different factors that we can look into to see which is the most attractive market to enter into. Starting off with the levels and growth of disposable income. Now, all disposable income, first of all, is the money that we have left after all of our taxes and essential bills have been paid for. So, for example, essential bills such as my rent. Now, of course, what I do with my disposable income, I can either save it, invest it, or just typically spend it on products and services. Now, the reason why we want to assess the level of disposable income per consumer is because we want to see, well, are the consumers in that country a good fit for our products or services? Can they afford our products and services? And we also want to look at the growth rate over time. Because if we were to relate back to one of my favourite topics from Theme 1, income elasticity of demand, we know that depending on the type of product we're talking about, the change in income will influence the demand in a couple of different ways. So for example, if we are a luxury good, that is income elastic with a positive value. So if we see the growth of consumers' income rising at a nice rate, we know that the level of demand for our luxury goods will increase at a greater rate. But of course, maybe our inferior goods, we wouldn't like it as much, because inferior goods have a negative income elasticity of demand, which means that as income rises, level of demand for these type of products and services go down, but also vice versa. As the level of consumer income goes down, the demand for these inferior goods begin to increase. So I'm assessing different countries, what's happening with their average level of consumer disposable income. The next important assessment of a country is the ease of doing business. Now, it's in the name, it's how simple it is for a business to start, operate and expand in a country. And that could be impacted by loads of different factors. We could look at regulations in that country, what the legal system like, level of taxes, what about the infrastructure development. We'll talk about infrastructure as well in a lot more detail. Now, when it is easy to do business in a country, typically costs are likely to be lower due to reduced regulatory barriers, also more streamlined processes and fewer bureaucratic delays because there's less rules and policies that we have to follow. So hopefully less delays within the business and running it more cost effective. Another really important assessment point is the infrastructure of that country. Now, we spoke about infrastructure. By now we should know what this means. It's the development of the physical and organizational structures. So it's about transport links, it's about the utilities, it's about the communication systems, the ability to connect to the internet, the road systems in that country. Now, in theory, if you was to have good physical infrastructure, it's a lot easier to do business there. You know, the cost of transportation typically becomes a lot lower. And the business starts to run a lot more efficiently, and the speed of production and delivering those products begins to increase. However, if infrastructure is not that well developed, typically like in our developing countries, then actually as a market, it may not be that attractive. Because if I'm selling an online service, but the connection to the internet is quite poor within that market, in that country, then I wouldn't really want to expand there. And as well, if the physical infrastructure isn't well, so I can make the product or service, but it's going to be really difficult to actually deliver that to customers. Once again, that may put a company off entering a market. And it's not just about actually selling the product or service, it's also about running the business. Because once again, the communication infrastructure is really important. Because if I'm operating in multiple different countries, I want to make sure I'm communicating between our different business units. So we want to make sure the communication infrastructure is also developed to enable more efficient and faster communication. Once again, another important factor will be around the political stability. Now, political stability refers to a consistent and predictable government environment with minimal risk of conflict or policy changes. Now, essentially, the political stability creates a secure and predictable environment for businesses, which will help encourage overall investment and economic growth. Now, when governments are stable, your policies, they remain consistent. There's less uncertainty for your businesses and your customers. So this level of stability, it tends to attract foreign direct investment and supports more long-term planning. Whereas in the situations where the political environment is definitely not stable, and this could happen due to frequent leadership change, there may be also corruption within the government or just general civil unrest. This can actually put businesses off expanding into these markets. So what a business would want to see is they would want to enter a market where the political environment is stable, because this reduces their uncertainty. They're able to better plan for the future. However, political stability is often dramatically affected during the election process if they are in trade disputes, or if there's any conflicts happening within the country or surrounding the country itself, maybe between them and a neighbouring country. And the final assessment factor of a country to see whether it is a good market or not is going to be the exchange rate. Now, think of our exchange rates. We know it's how much one currency can be exchanged for another. Now, remember our two acronyms, SPICed and WIPIDEC. So if the pound is stronger, it's going to make importing a lot cheaper and exporting a lot dearer. So if the pound is actually stronger, it makes foreign direct investment into that country a lot cheaper. So expanding your presence could be a good thing. But if you were just thinking about exporting to that country, well, when our pound is stronger, this is going to be more problematic. Because for those foreign customers, it's more expensive. And we know, law of demand, if the price is more for them, the level of demand for us typically goes down. And we've also got WIPIDEC. So weaker pound, imports now become dearer. So if you was looking at foreign direct investment into that country, it's going to be a bit more expensive for you. But for exporters, they love it because it now becomes cheaper. Because those foreign customers, they don't have to pay as high a price. In actual fact, the price goes down for them. Law of demand, if the price goes down for them, for the UK exporters, the demand begins to go up. And the next topic in this revision video that we're going to take a look into will now be the assessment of a country, not as a market, but as a production location. Now, once again, there are several different factors that we want to look into for this. First of all, the cost of production. Now, as we said earlier on about offshoring or outsourcing, businesses typically do this in these foreign countries because it's going to be a bit cheaper for them. Mainly this will be around the labour costs, because minimum wages in the UK, as I said, could be around that £12 mark, but in these more developing countries, it could be less than 50 pence an hour. But the one thing that you would have to evaluate for this is that, yes, the labour cost could be a lot lower, so that could be an attractive factor. But the one thing we would need to do is to consider the skills of that labour force, which leads me on nicely now to the skills and availability of labour force within that country. Now, as I've said, even though yes, reducing labour costs will be an important thing because the business in theory could become more profitable. But the issue is, if those employees do not have the relevant skills, then the quality would actually go down of our products or services. So if our quality is going down, then that could damage our reputation. We may not be able to charge as much of a price. So if we want to maintain our quality standards, then we need to develop the skills of the labour in that country. And if they don't have formal education systems in place, we're going to have to take control. So we're going to have to provide that training and support. So the cost that you save on the labour, you actually then end up increasing because of the training investment. And whether that country can provide skilled labour kind of depends on the education systems in that country. Now, what we find with these developing countries is that they don't have enough money to invest into their education systems compared to countries like the UK and the US, where we've got high amounts of investment going into our education systems. And it also depends on the specialisation of that country. So you may find different countries across the world are specialised in certain levels of education. For example, Germany with their engineering. The next important factor will be around the infrastructure. Now, we looked at the infrastructure in terms of whether it would be a good market. It also plays an important factor for the production location. Because once again, in these developing countries, okay, let's say you have enough skilled labour and let's say the labour cost is really cheap. Well, what if the infrastructure is poor? Because it might then be difficult to establish those production facilities. Because even though if you can reduce costs in those other areas, your efficiency of your overall operations may begin to decrease. So consider stuff like the communication infrastructure and the physical infrastructure, such as the road and the transport links. And the reason therefore why the communication infrastructure is so important is because it helps for more efficient coordination, reduces the overall delays, and overall supports for more smooth business operations. Now, another really important factor when a business is choosing which country that they want to set up their production location in will be about whether that country is within a trade bloc. Now, remember our three main trading blocs. We've got the EU, ASEAN, and also USMCA, previously known as NAFTA. Now, the reason why you want to be set up within one of these trading blocs is because of trade liberalisation that happens. Now, remember, that's the removal or the reduction of trade barriers between these different members within that trade bloc. So if you can set up your production facilities there, you therefore have access to being within that trade bloc. So for example, if I'm an American company, but I want to have more presence within the EU, but at the moment, I'm actually running into issues with trade barriers, where if I set up one of my production facilities within one of the members of the EU, then I then grant access to being in the EU. So actually selling my products and services to those different member states, I don't run into the issues such as tariffs or quotas. Next up on the list will be the level of government incentives. Now, realistically, a government wants to attract FDI. Because the more FDI that they attract, the more economic activity that happens within their country typically begins to increase. So what the government may offer for these businesses to come and manufacture their products here is that we could offer them some relief, so potentially tax breaks or grants. Because what the government wants to do is they want to provide more employment for their country. Because of course, the more people employed, the lower the unemployment rates, more people earn money, more people spend money, and overall that economy should begin to grow. The next factor that we have is the ease of doing business. This looks familiar because it was one of the key assessments of the country of being a market. It can also be a key assessment when looking at a country as a production location. Now, once again, the ease of doing business. Why? Well, this is influenced, as we said, by the regulations and the taxation of that country, which will impact the overall company's cost and operational efficiency. Now, the ease of doing business, this is a key factor when choosing a production location, as it will directly affect our cost and efficiency. Now, countries with a clear regulations, low bureaucracy, and a fair tax system make it easier for businesses to operate smoothly. So this will help reduce delays, minimize compliance costs, and overall allow the firm to focus on production rather than trying to navigate this complex legal system. But in contrast, if a country with excessive red tape, high taxes, this can actually slow down operations, increase our costs, and make it less attractive overall for production. Another factor that we've also seen before will be around the political stability. Now, the political stability, it will help reduce risks, by providing, once again, that predictable business environment for the company to operate in. So countries with stable government are less likely to experience disruptions such as strikes, protests, or sudden policy changes that could of course impact the operations of businesses. Now this stability, it provides a business with confidence in the long term, reduces overall risk, and once again helps us operating smoothly. Now on the other hand, political instability can lead to uncertainty because we may face delays, potential financial losses, and overall it may just look like too big of a concern and too much hassle for us to set up in that country. Another really important factor, and it kind of depends on the type of product that you're making, but what type of natural resources are present within that country. Because some businesses, they may want to locate closer to where those natural resources are because it could be a bit cheaper for them rather than having it transported across the globe. And as well, it may just be a requirement. So for example, if we are looking at mining certain natural resources, that might be what my business is all about, then of course I've got to go set up wherever those mines are. And for any other companies locating in close proximity to those natural resources, we've got more reliable supply. And the very last assessment point is going to be the likely return on our investment. Now, we've done lots of investment appraisals, we've done the payback period, the average rate of return, the net present value. So what you would want to do, you would want to look at the return on investment. How much is that initial upfront investment to go and produce over there, and what is the likely returns over a period of time? So depending on which one you prefer to look at or the one that you decide to conduct, payback, ARR, and net present value, it can help assess different locations against each other. Just a quick one, if you need a bit more support with your exam technique, such as how you improve your analysis, how to apply more within your answers, and how to evaluate more, well, I've created a free exam technique course that helps you with this. It also goes through the key answer structures that you need to follow for your exams, including those 4 markers, 8 markers, 10, 12, and those dreaded 20 markers. You can access this exam technique course for completely free using the link in the description. Back to the video. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be the different reasons why we want to look at global mergers or joint ventures. Now quickly, little bit of recap. Remember, a merger is when 2 or more businesses agree to join together to form a single company. Now remember, with a merger, those single entity companies now no longer exist. The only thing that exists is this new merged company, and it must be agreed on by both companies, so typically a merger is a lot more friendlier. Whereas a joint venture, this is 2 or more companies collaborating together, sharing resources, risks and profits in order to complete a certain project or operation. Now, it doesn't have to be a new product, but I feel like most joint ventures tend to be new product development. But it's important to note that collaboration is only temporary, and those 2 individual businesses still exist by themselves. They don't merge to form a new one, they just join operations for a temporary period of time. Now, it's important to know when you are writing these points about a global merger or joint venture, don't write about generic points of why a business would want to merge with another, because we're focused more so on a global merger. Now, there are a few different things that we can look into. Starting off with, we've got spreading risk. Now, we spoke about this before, about why a business would want to enter those international markets, because I don't want to be overly reliant on that current market that I'm in, because what if there is an economic downturn? But if I'm in several different markets and only one of those countries goes into an economic downturn, I still have consistent income from those others. Another really important factor is to enter new markets and our trade blocks. Now remember, our trade blocks, we've already looked into this. If you are entering into a trade block, you remove those trade barriers between different members within that trading block. So not only do you have the benefit of having those trade barriers removed, but it also saves you a lot of time. So rather than trying to get permission to enter that market, setting up my own operations or logistics, if I'm merging or work with a joint venture with another company, then I automatically bypass that and it's a lot quicker to actually enter in those markets. Another really important factor is acquiring your brand names and your patents or patents, depending on how you like to pronounce it. Now, this is all about intellectual property, and it's going to be important to do this overseas because, once again, we could look at a market development strategy from Ansos Matrix where I take my existing products into that new market. The problem that I actually have is that new market has no idea who I am. They've probably never even seen my business before. But if I merge or if I join with another company and I get to leverage their branding, Well, if they have a strong brand image in that country and everyone knows who they are, then automatically I get that brand image transfer, which essentially means the good branding that that company has built gets passed on to me. I could also as well get access to some of their unique products or services, because if you think about it, different countries around the world, the cultural factors will be different. People have specific needs and wants. Now, rather than me trying to learn, make a product that hopefully is fitted for them, well, other companies around the world may have really unique products and services that they have legally protected through patents or patents that I also now get access to. Another important factor as well could be around securing the resources and supplies. So actually what we could do is look at backwards vertical integration. So we're going further back in the supply chain, because that supplier may be located in a country where they have access to really rare and unique resources. So if I actually combine my operations with them, I then get access to it. And not only that, I can prevent my competitors having access to those unique resources. And that acts as a strong barrier to entry. Now, if we have this on a global basis, the threat of new entrants are a lot lower. That would give me a large competitive advantage on a global basis. So my level of sales could really begin to increase because of this. And the very final reason we could also look at is either maintaining or increasing our global competitiveness. Now think a global merger or even a global joint venture. You're talking about two very potential large businesses coming together. Now if that's the case, two large amounts of output bringing in together to make even a larger amount of output. The economies of scale, just think about it. The amount of output begins to dramatically increase, so our unit cost could really begin to reduce to a point where no other company in the world could compete with us on that point. Because remember, Porter's strategic matrix, he argued if you're the lowest cost producer in that market or industry, you have the competitive advantage. You control the prices, your profitability might be higher, so overall, your global competitive position could improve. And finally, we could also look at synergy. Remember, 1 + 1 = 3. The value of those two individual businesses combined will be greater than them by themselves. Now, if you are bringing two global businesses together, they may have their own unique specialist knowledge, where bringing that together could help improve their differentiation strategies, or they could be offering products and services that could complement each other. So potentially a global airline business with a global hotel chain. Bring them together, you got a global holiday package. And as well, it would also expand their product offerings. And the last topic in this revision video that we need to take a look into will be around global competitiveness. So essentially, we need to find what impacts the competitiveness of a business on a global basis. Now remember, whenever we talk about competitiveness and competitive advantage, please refer to Porter's strategic matrix back from theme 3. Now, what he argued is that there are two sources of competitive advantage, either through low cost or through differentiation. So what we want to look at now are some different factors that may impact some of these. Starting off with, of course, our exchange rates. Now, remember the acronym SPICE and WIPADEC. Now, if your currency is stronger, so you may have a stronger pound, well, the imports are going to be a lot cheaper. Now, of course, if you are running a low cost strategy, this is going to be extremely beneficial because you can reduce your costs even further. But if you are an exporter, actually the stronger pound may start to hinder your competitiveness, because from those foreign customers' perspective, your products has now become a lot more expensive. The price has gone up, and we know with the law of demand, if you see a higher price, typically demand goes down. You're going to be seen as less competitive in the market because of your higher prices. But when we look at WIPADEC, the situation changes. If you are an importer, this now becomes more dearer. So trying to run that low cost strategy can become quite problematic because on average, costs are going to go up. However, from an exporter's perspective, your prices now seem more competitive in the market, so you can actually be more competitive with that weaker pound if you are an exporter. Now we're going to look at our cost competitiveness. Now remember, we've looked at this quite a lot already. When we look at global businesses, on average, their economies of scale is going to be a lot higher because their level of output is going to increase as they're selling to more people across the globe. Now, of course, if this is the case, their access to economies of scale is going to be really high, so their unit cost would be a lot lower. So in terms of that global competitiveness stance, they're going to be in a better position. Not only that, but the global business as well may start to focus on offshoring, because if they can produce their goods and services at a cheaper rate because of lower labor costs, then once again, this puts them in a better position for more cost competitiveness. Then we've also got our differentiation points from Porter's strategic matrix. Now, typically the reason why you would go for a global merger or a joint venture is to gain access to specialized skills and knowledge. Because if you're building a unique product, that company who you decide to work with, or of course decide to merge with, they may possess the knowledge that you need, and that could help improve the quality of the products or services that you offer, improving your level of differentiation. And not only that, because if you're expanding into those global markets, well, that company, once again, they may have specialized knowledge of the customers within that market. And of course as well, we can also look at outsourcing. Remember, outsourcing, we're using a different company. This could be within the UK or of course overseas. Now, the reason why you would want to outsource is to a company who are better at the thing that you want doing. So rather than you trying to invest money into that, you already work with a specialist who can do it for you, so you can still focus on your core competencies. And the very final thing that we need to do is look at the impact that skill shortages might have on our international competitiveness. Now, the shortages of skilled and specialized staff, they can directly affect a business's ability to differentiate themselves. As the skilled staff, they are the ones who create that unique product. But consider topics that you've already been learning across Theme 4. We could potentially look at outsourcing to overcome this issue, or we can look at offshoring, as these are both ways to fix this issue. But yes, you will argue it will depend on who you outsource to and where you're offshoring to. This will be impacted, of course, by the education levels of that country to see if they do have skilled labour to provide you. If you found this revision video useful and want to continue revising your Theme 4 topics, then I highly recommend you check out our video here on Theme 4.3 Global Marketing, as we're going to go through some of those important global marketing approaches such as ethnocentric, polycentric, geocentric. We'll also look at how we apply our marketing mix and Ansof's matrix on a global basis. We'll also take a look at global niche markets and different cultural and social factors that could influence a business's strategy. I hope these videos once again have been helping you with your revision. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.